Hi there, in case you're wondering, that's me. No, not that one. This one. Well, at least at the start of Planet Zoo anyway. But hopefully, with the tips and tricks that I'm going to share with you in this video, I'll be able to make pathing just that little bit more bearable. But let's jump into the tips and tricks, shall we? Now, before we jump on in, just to kind of throw a little disclaimer in here. All of the tips I'm going to show you are going to be given using keybinds from the PC. I don't own the console version, and I wasn't able to find someone who owns the console version who was able to help me out for this video. So for the purposes of this video alone, it's going to be purely PC keybind based. But I'm going to go off on a whim and just assume that all the tips I'm going to show you in this video are also going to be applicable to the console version, given obviously the game's running off of the same engine. So with that being said, let's jump on in. And here we are with tip number 1. And this isn't really a tip to do with pathing per se, but rather a tip you can do using a path. And that is to stop your terrain from being adjusted when you're placing down your enrichment items. As you can see here, I've got a scratching post, and when I place it down, it completely changes and flattens the terrain around it. Now, if you've already done your terrain work, you don't want this to happen, it can be very annoying. So how do you get around this? Simply just put down a piece of path on the ground, go and get your enrichment item that you want to place down and place it on top of said path, and you'll notice that the terrain doesn't adjust or change at all. And then once you're done, you can go through and delete the piece of path, and the changes stay as they were. It doesn't flatten the terrain after you delete the path. And tip number 2, again, this is going to be a tip that isn't about paths, but rather a tip you can do with paths. Now, you can't place things like bins and benches off of the path. So when you're trying to make maybe like a little picnic area on the grass, you can either use null paths, or you can use this tip here. Simply, again, you just place a stray piece of path roughly where you want your bin or bench to be, and then delete the piece of path underneath that. I've done this so many times when I'm using, say, the conservation benches when making little picnic areas, and it really works a treat. I always prefer this method over to using, say, the null paths, because when you use the null paths, they're still there and they can still cause a little bit of issues with things like snapping if they're a little bit too close to the path, like this one would be here. Tip number 3, and this is going to be the last tip regarding using paths, and it's a bit of a niche one. Have you ever wanted a garden sort of lawn that is very a stately manner? Well, here's how you can do it using the conservation path, I believe it is, which has this like green grassy texture. If you place it to grid and then just sort of place it in a snaking pattern similar to what I'm doing here, and then delete the ones in between each other row, you end up with this really nice straight lined lawn that is very reminiscent of something like maybe Downton Abbey. Now, I have to give credit to Just Goran for this. I believe he was the one that I saw use this a while ago, and I thought, you know what, it's very niche and cool, and I had to put it in this video. So thanks, Goran, for that. And into number 4, and this is going to be the first tip regarding actually helping you get better pathings in your zoo. And this is one I've covered a couple of times here now. A lot of you new players joining us will be doing straight grid based paths like what you can see here, but there's no reason why you can't snazz them up a little bit. And how are you going to do this? Well, if you go to the corner of your paths and just place a path in the corner like you see me doing just here, and then deleting it straight after, the game automatically makes this really nice curve shape, and you can see how nice it looks compared to that just straight 90-degree angle just there. And tip number 5. So you've got your straight path and you want to have a fork coming off of that initial path. Now, you could be doing it like you see me doing here, where you just add it to the side of the path and then just slalom it off onto the direction you want. But I'm going to show you a better way. Now, holding control on PC, you'll be able to separate your path so that it doesn't snap automatically. And then from here, you're going to join it to the path rather than doing it from the original path. And you end up with this much cleaner break in the path rather than it sort of bending out to a 90-degree angle and then turning back on itself. This really helps for things like your direction of travel if you want to influence where people are going, Obviously, if people are coming from this one path, then it makes it a bit nicer to be able to see the options available. Obviously, it doesn't really work if you're coming back on yourself the other way. That is potentially when you've maybe used a 90-degree angle. And tip number 6. Now, a lot of you might be looking to start adding elevation to your zoos, and this is great because elevation really does do a lot for your zoos. But obviously, when you're doing elevation and you are pressing your U key to raise the path or your J key in order to lower the path, you'll notice that the elevation changes are quite dramatic and they may not be exactly what you need. So down here in the bottom right hand corner, you've got the elevation height or length option, and this is going to help you be really precise with where you want it to be. So that first one there was number 4, and then we're going to change this to 2, and you can see it's half the length, and you can bring this all the way down, and you end up with some really nice results. So this here, you end up with just 2 steps, and this means you can be really precise with where you want to bring your pathing up to. So here you see I've just added a couple of paths. Press U to flatten it back out, and it means you can have this sort of like nice raised little area, and then I can just round this whole area off without it being too high from the get-go, because 4 meters is quite high. Tip number 7, and by default when you click the select grid, it is going to set it to the world axis by default. And this can be very annoying when you're trying to place paths in a certain place, but you can't because the grid is restricting you. An easy way around this is just to place a second piece of path adjoining to it. This way the axis is going to change completely, and it's going to be based relative to the 2 pieces that you place, like you can see here. And it just means you can then go through and place down paths exactly where you want to when placing them on the grid. And this means you can go around and start doing some circles. But how can you do circles, I hear you ask? Well, that's very simple as well. What you're going to do is you're going to select the length of choice on paths. Press spacebar to make sure that snapping is on. That is the shortcut to turn snapping off and on. And set it to 15 degrees. This is the best setting in my honest opinion. And then every increment that you place down a piece of path, you want to tilt it inwards by 2 notches. And by notches, I mean, you see how the path snaps twice there. So snap, 1, 2, place. 1, 2, place, 1, 2, place, 1, 2, place, and keep doing this all the way around until you get a completely smooth round circle. Now obviously if you was using a longer length path, you'd end up with a bigger circle, and you could even place a habitat or garden in the middle of that circle. And now for number 8. Now you've just placed down yourself a fancy new habitat, and you want the path to run alongside that barrier. And a lot of people don't realize this, but there's actually an option in these settings down in that cog menu to make it so that your path will automatically snap and align to the barrier. So instead of you going through and doing what I do here, and that is just sort of eyeball it, try and get it as close as you can, and potentially end up with the error where you can't place your path because it's being stopped by the barrier. By enabling this snap to barrier setting, you're basically sort of getting rid of that middle trouble and just making it so that you can just automatically place it alongside without putting any thought into how close it potentially is. I would recommend obviously going back and maybe deleting the original piece so that you can then replace it so that it definitely snaps to the barrier to the same distance that the rest of the path has as well, just for a little bit more uniform and neatness to the whole thing. And tip number 9. I've covered a couple of them in this video already, but I'm just going to put them all into one little area just so it's a little bit easier for you to understand, and that's keybinds. So for your snapping, you're basically going to be pressing space to enable that and disable it. With separating your paths from the main path, holding control will allow you to do this as well. Plus and minus mean that you can shorten and lengthen the path without sort of being constrained by the finickiness of trying to hit the exact number that you want. Plus and minus does this beautifully. And obviously, like I've already said, U and J is how you raise and lower your paths. Pressing U once raises it to the ramp, and pressing U again raises it so that it becomes a staircase. Now, if you go down here and turn on the tunneling option and then press U while it is flat, then it will actually go into the ground. Pressing J again will then turn it into a staircase. So this is nice if you're trying to sort of maybe do an underground viewing area as well. And finally, tip number 10. Okay, so this is going to be a continuation of tip number 4, where I was using the method to make rounded corners. But what you may not know is that you can actually keep doing this and stacking it to make yourself some really cool, funky shaped plazas. So instead of having some square plazas, you can just keep placing, deleting, placing, and then deleting at the angles you see me placing here. And this sort of triangular area just sort of keeps opening up and up and up. And guests can fully navigate this whole area. They're not restricted in any way. They can fully traverse across this whole triangular area. And you can even sort of carry it on the other side as well. And yeah, it's really, really cool. Just bear in mind though that this can make paths a bit buggy when it comes to deleting them. So when you see me hovering over the piece of path, you see how it's outlined with that sort of light blue border. This does mean that if you was to delete any section when I'm hovering over that, it's going to delete the whole section as a whole, like you see me do just here. So if I go delete path and then delete any section along here, it's literally just going to delete the whole triangle and you're back to square one. But that is it for this tips and tricks video. I do hope you enjoyed. If you want to see any more videos on tips and tricks, let me know what you would want to see tips and tricks on, and I will be happy to help out. If you have enjoyed, feel free to hit the like and subscribe. But thanks for watching. Peace out. Love you all.